What's up, everyone? Zero here. So I recorded another episode of the podcast today. With this time, I sat down with Lighty. Very, very insightful. He's a very smart guy. He's been playing Path of Exile for a very long time. So I'm excited to share this one with you guys. A quick side note: if you guys want to further support the channel, I did start a Patreon. It will be in the description. So if you guys want to support the channel further and see more of this content, more of like on a full-time basis, I would really appreciate the support. You can either join the YouTube channel, you can subscribe on Patreon, or you can subscribe to my Twitch channel. All the links will be in the description below. The main goal is to start doing this full time. With that being said, let's get into the episode. Yeah, so just for people that might not know who you are just watching this, can you just tell everybody who you are and kind of how you got into playing Path of Exile?
Sure. So my name is Lighty because that's my last name. And I have been playing PoE for 12 years since the initial closed beta. I mostly initially played hardcore, and then we started playing solo self-found before the game mode was official. And then when it officially came out, that's pretty much strictly what I play. I'm most well known for the All for One series, I guess in the Rags to Riches series, and that sort of content. And I've been streaming full time for 7 years and playing PoE. I don't use POB, which is very rare amongst the people who play Path, so that alone is something I get asked about often.
Right.
And I, do all my build stuff, and I share them sometimes, and I can, done everything in the game that ever has to offer, so pretty well versed. But yeah.
Right on. So I wanted to ask you about that. So what do you use when you're putting together builds, like aside from POB? Like, what do you use? Any other resources? Are there anything else you
Only
recommend to
thing
people?
I'll use, I recommend using whatever you're most comfortable with. I have no problem with POB. I just don't use it because to me it doesn't display the most important metrics when it comes to playing a build, which is a feel because that's not describable on a website,
Right.
and feel comfortability with the build. It can be something as little as just how many buttons you have to click. I don't like pushing a lot of buttons. So if I could play a build that is somehow has automated setups or something like that, that is something that's really important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondarily, it doesn't really display damage uptime very well, which is extremely important for doing things like uber bossing or harder content that is physically evasion based where your character's manually dodging. So damage uptime is quite important to me. So feel and damage uptime are the two most important metrics that I care about,
Okay.
aside from obviously not dying, because that feels worse than anything else. So
Right.
I
Right.
don't,
Right.
that's why I prioritize. And when I'm doing a build, I really can't find that from a website. So if I have to sometimes make, build guides for people because I get asked so often. So I'll use whatever, I use like PoE Planner to just display a tree and basic information.
Right.
Otherwise, I kind of just do it in like a build diary series on
Okay.
YouTube. But I'm not, I mean, the passive tree is basically memorized for me, so I don't really need to. I can just know where to route because I've been playing for so long. Um, yeah,
Right. Yeah.
which
You've
is
been
not helpful for new players, but yeah.
you've been playing. So you've been playing since before the closed beta. So you have like a very
I've seen every iteration of the game. Yeah,
yeah, you have a mastery of the game that probably most people won't have. So, um,
sure. Yeah.
let's see, what's a good way to ask this? Okay, so what build are you playing right now?
So the short answer in not just in solo self but in trade also, or in any walk of life, hardcore, softcore, you want to play not what you want to play. You want to play the build best suited for the job, whatever the job is.
Right.
Because it realistically in PoE, especially over the years, it's more important that you are making progress than having fun in a weird way. Because nothing feels worse than dying and not doing any damage. So to me, that's more of a priority than leaning towards archetypes I typically like. For example, if I really enjoyed summoners, but summoners are at a particularly shit spot in the game at the moment, I'm not going to force that. I'm just going to play what is best to achieve the base level of my goals. So if the base level of my goals is get 40 challenges, kill each Uber boss 100 times, get all the gear I could want to do whatever I want to do, that's going to be the priority. And then I could kind of do the frivolous activities. So the league start for me, which my league start because I play SSF and I play so much Path. Everything is really easy if you can play a lot, really, because you could just outpace and outtime most challenges in the game. So I spin a wheel every league to pick my builds because if I just played the most efficient thing and the best thing, it would be a much more formulaic experience, but I would be so far so fast and I would maybe get more bored quickly. So I spin a wheel or randomize what I pick. In this league, I had Tornado of Elemental Turbulence, which is a very, very strong build as a starter on an Inquisitor. And I played that, and then I did not get the necessary gear I needed, so I transitioned to a much more better build for a league start, which was the Eviscerate Ignite Elementalist. And then from there, I leveled 8 more builds. And then once I got the gear for Tornado, I went back to that. And then I made Forbidden Rite as a bossing character. Although my Tornado build can do everything in the game, it's just better to do it on Forbidden Rite at the moment.
Are you playing the Soul Sacrifice one?
It is the only way to play Forbidden Rite at the moment because of what I would basically describe as a missed interaction, I would imagine. I don't think it was intended that they thought Forbidden Rite of Soul Sacrifices mana cost would be subverted by Whispers of Infinity. I don't think that that was planned because it's so blatantly obvious that there's no other choice because
Right.
like if you do the other Forbidden Rite, you're just losing damage. So yeah, soul sacrifices. I don't want to instill a sense of FOMO because it's already pretty horrendous in this game. But if you have the time
Hmm.
and you've never played a Forbidden Rite, I would recommend playing Soul Sacrifice right now because I'd be very surprised if it exists next league to this level of interaction.
Right. What about that skill makes it so powerful?
So the major downside of it is that it has a life cost. So it has a much, much higher conversion of energy shield to base chaos, and then the damage is just way higher. And the downside of it compared to regular Forbidden Rite is it costs life. Except it doesn't when you're using Whispers. Whispers of Infinity makes it so all skills cost ES instead of life or mana, which it's doing exactly what it says it's supposed to do. I just think they didn't intend for that to happen because there's no purpose to ever play the other Forbidden Rites. Essentially, when you're doing this version, it's just that much stronger than the others. I don't know how they would rectify it. Maybe just reduce, make it so instead of costing life, you lose life because that would just make it immediately not work.
Right.
But something like that. But yeah, basically, it's totally subverting the massive downside of the skill, which happens a lot in PoE. There's a lot of things fall through the cracks because there's a lot of moving parts. But that one seems a bit maybe unintended.
So when you're looking at the skill gem tooltip, like okay, so you
Yep.
look at what about a skill really stands out to you, especially just for like a spell, right? Like using a spell as an attack.
Sure.
I'm looking at the tooltip right now for Forbidden Rite of Soul Sacrifice, and I'll put it up on the screen too, so other people can kind of follow
Yeah.
along with it. When you're looking at this skill, what are the key points that stand out to you where you can look at this and be like, oh wow, this is going to be like a really powerful skill? Is it just like the
So
flat
if
damage? Is it the effectiveness of added
Yeah,
damage?
if you had no game knowledge, nothing would stand out.
Mm-hmm.
If you have game knowledge, you identify that scaling your ability scaling offensively off of your defense is what's so powerful. It's the reason why things like strength and instackers are so strong is because your offense is your defense. So
Right.
things like ephemeral edge as a weapon or energy blade, for example. I think you had Captain Lance on, right? He's a big
Yeah.
energy blade fan.
Yeah.
So, if you could go CI, Chaos Inoculation, and have 15,000 ES as your defense, and then also be a large chunk of your offense, you're just killing two birds with one stone. Most of PoE, when it comes to scaling, is the most ways you could kind of tether scaling together, the better it gets. Whether it's doing damage conversions or double dipping, as we used to call it,
Mm-hmm.
or having it so your offense is your defense and vice versa. That's what gets you to that next level of being able to just face 10 Cooper bosses, do all those Valdos maps that have like 90% damage reduction, the crazy stuff. You can get that level of defense and also have a decent chunk of damage.
Right. So, can you double dipping is no longer a thing, correct?
For the most part, no. Same with shotgunning, that also really doesn't exist. The
Okay.
term double dipping implies that you were converting damage A, so say flat physical damage, into elemental damage, damage B, and somehow you were scaling a value that affected both the beginning and the end. So you dipped twice into the damage pool. And then the equivalent of that would be like shotgunning is another way thing that used to exist was imagine you shot 5 fireballs.
Hmm.
If they overlapped, you would take multiple damage. And some things do shotgun, but some things don't. Path
Okay.
of Exile is a wonderful game full of many inconsistencies. And
Right, right,
a lot
right.
of enemies also have, like, Rogue Exiles have legacy versions of a lot of our rules. So they'll have things that shotgun that we can't shotgun, or they'll have legacy versions of like Immortal Call, and we don't have that. So some of those things just kind of happen, but there's so many moving parts in the machine that is PoE that it's really impossible to keep it all together.
Right, right. So, as far as just like in a general way, what kind of I don't want to call them like break points, but like when you're building like offensively, when you're making a build, what kind of milestones are you just does it need to
Yeah,
hit for it to be like a comfortable
great point.
offensive build for you?
So the old phrase, which we used to say, we used to gauge DPS by how fast you can kill Shaper, which was a benchmark that is ridiculously outdated.
Right.
Um, in general, the short answer is whatever amount of damage that doesn't feel shit when you're bossing, because it depends on the personal tolerance. If you're okay spending 5 minutes killing a boss and you're immortal, that's great. If you're like, this is too long, then, that's great. I've done league starts where it took me 30 minutes to kill Maven, and that did not feel great. So that's bad. The short answer is like 3 to 4 million damage is enough, and then like 4 times that is comfortable for Ubers because they've got a 70% damage reduction plus higher base life, but there's nowhere in game is it going to display. It's just a feel thing. This is where I mean by like POB,
Right,
you can't
right,
really
right.
use this for that. It's just going to be based off your personal tolerance, preference, and feel. But a million DPS doesn't mean a million uptime damage. So that's where it's like you playing maybe like a bleed build or an ignite build or something like a minion build that has high uptime. So, for example, I was playing that eviscerate ignite build,
Right.
which I'm reaching the dot cap, which is 37-ish million damage, but it's an eviscerate, which means I'm triggering retaliation. So I have to wait to be hit to trigger it, and there's like 4, 5, 6 seconds of sometimes the boss not hitting me,
Mm-hmm.
which means I'm now my damage is being divided by that amount. Now, if I had 1/7 the damage, but it was consistent, it would equal the same amount of DPS effectively. So that's where it's like you don't have to have a ton of damage if your uptime is, pretty decent. So a couple million, like if you could kill, whatever, any boss in like a minute or two, including their various iframes and phases, like that's perfectly fine. I'd much rather be totally have zero risk of death than prioritize doing damage fast. Because again, like dead people don't do damage, so
Right, right, right.
you want to stay alive. And that's where it comes to like talking about builds things. As far as DPS milestones, it's easier, but when it comes to defenses, it's a little bit more awkward because I was joking recently that like people think that block is OP, but or suppression's OP, for example, right? But it's not that they're overpowered. It's just that that's all that's left to do. So
Mm-hmm.
we're typically left with building the best form of whatever defense we have. We're just like chasing the dragon when they're nerfing things.
Right.
So, for example, like Lightning Strike was very strong last league. It gets nerfed hard. Same with Frostblade, so people play Smite. It's not that Smite is broken. It's just the next best thing. So defenses are the same. But when it comes to defense, there's some base rules. You want to basically tick all the boxes of immunities, right? That's the most important thing. So immune to bleed, immune to poison, corrupting blood, impale, you just go through the list pretty much of any debuff in the game that you don't want on you, you try to get immune to it. Status effects is some of the most important, shock being the most important because it just makes you take like fucking double damage out of nowhere.
Right.
So, you want to get ailment immunity, you want to have a decent life pool, you want to start, doing all these things. But it's a matter of feel ultimately. But for those things, it's like again, nothing feels worse than dying. So it's you just want to make sure you're as sturdy as possible. So if you could build with 20 30K effective life, have all your defensive immunities, and have a couple million damage, you could pretty much do most of the game, and that's not too hard to build on any build. So
What are
pretty
some of the
flexible ultimately.
what are some of the ways that like somebody that they have experience in the game but they haven't really approached build making yet, what are some of the ways that people can go about finding the different interactions like in ways to mitigate some of those debuffs that you're talking about?
So it's not great to figure out what's killing you in this game. That's not great. And there's no real glossary. No, there's no real resources in game actually. The way that the characters are displayed are even kind of strange in the buckets, but you're just looking for ticking all the debuff boxes. So what I would recommend, I'm sure POB has a section for this, but if you just go to the wiki and you can click on and you can just look up debuffs, I would literally just try to make yourself immune to every single thing that is relevant to you.
Right.
So like you're not going to experience zombie tar too often, so you don't have to worry about getting like action speed immunity in that regard. But
Mm-hmm.
unironically, we're in Merc League, so every single Merc can just have a guard with the ephemeral on them, which just totally makes you crit immune, but and action speed immune. But yeah, I mean things like ailment immunity, crit immunity, bleed poison, those are some of your biggest ones. Impale is becoming more prevalent, but these are things that one shot you. I what I would really recommend, if anything, whether you're using OBS or Shadowplay, you could set a replay buffer, and anytime you die, just rewatch it and try to figure out because even if you were hit with lethal damage, it still applies the debuff to your character.
Mm-hmm.
So you could even see when watching it back, like, oh, I got impaled or whatever. I
Yeah.
should get impale immunity.
And the debuffs will display at the top of the screen. So if you're it'll have like
They
a
will,
little
yes.
yeah. So if
Unless
you're
they don't
watching
want to, then that also just happens.
right
Sometimes
right
they
right
just don't because game. Yeah.
right. So
But
if you play
yeah.
it back though, you can look and see the little picture at the top, and it'll display what debuff
Yep.
was affecting you. Right. Okay. That's
And
actually a really
a
smart idea.
large portion of your defensive immunities early on you get from protection masteries.
Mm-hmm.
So on your passive tree, there's a mastery section called protection, which has things like corrupting blood immunity is a very popular one. That one gets rectified very easily in trade and even in Soul Suffon because corrupting blood is immunity is on any jewel has a corruption implicit, so that one's good. Can't be maimed or hindered is a slow, doesn't really affect you too much.
Mm-hmm.
Impale, I think it's the only source of can't be impaled in the entire game is that protection mastery.
Oh, okay.
Then one says non-damaging ailments can't be inflicted while you already have one. So if you have a poison, you can't be more poisoned or more bled. So that one's quite good. There's like a lot of them in general, or the stun mastery says you can't be. I think it's crit if you've been stunned recently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hits against you cannot be critical if you've been stunned recently. So that one's pretty good. So there's a lot of little things like that that really make a huge difference. But we talked about jewel corruptions from corrupting blood very slightly. That one, there's a lot of corrupted implicits that are super powerful. Whether it's curse reduction is a good one. Also, silence immunity, which is kind of an archaic debuff, but does present itself every now and again for casters. You can be silenced, which is just means you can't cast spells, which is pretty lethal in some scenarios.
Right. Yeah. If you can't do damage, it's gonna fuck you
Yep.
up.
Yeah, basically. So there's like a lot of little ways to do that, but the wiki I would say is the best thing. There's no real in-game resources in PoE, unfortunately.
Right.
Hopefully, it's something they rectify as the game continues. But yeah, the wiki is your best bet to just check all the debuffs and try to figure out what you're dying to and how to get it. In general, what I would recommend as like a way of instead of giving a mana fish, teaching someone to fish, is I would just check PoE.NINJA and parse through everybody playing something similar to what you're playing,
Right. Right. Right.
especially in trade, because if you look in trade versus SSF, they could normally just afford to be a worse player in a weird way. So they could
Mm-hmm.
like you could buy a lot of things that you wouldn't have to normally manually avoid, whether it's curse immunity or bleed immunity. So it's like instead of having to use a specific pantheon for bleed, trade players can typically just buy a bleed ring eventually if you're rich enough.
Right.
So that sort of stuff is a good way to see, oh, that immunity exists in that way for, the rich people, but maybe one day I'll get it. But if you could see it there, it's like it's accessible legally. But some of these things are very expensive. So if you're new to builds, you probably aren't sitting on hundreds of divines and things like getting a specific unique ring. For example, a very popular one in this league is Coiling Whisper, the one that gives you Soul Eater stacks. To try to get a Coiling Whisper with bleed or poison would probably be very expensive. To get one with both would probably be astronomically expensive, but it can happen because you could
Mm-hmm.
double corrupt rings, and there could be a bleed poison immune Coiling Whisper, which would probably be multiple mirrors, but that sort of stuff like does exist. You can get pretty degenerate levels of defenses and debuff immunities through corruptions or these kind of niche ways or synthesis implicits or these things that normally are not super accessible. That's where it comes the passive tree. So good for the protection masteries or your pantheons like the Soul of Ralakesh, which makes you bleed immune and reduces your corruption stacks, or things like Soul of Shikari, which is the same thing but for poison basically. Those are super super good early on, which is why I typically recommend when your protection mastery, grab corrupting blood while you get to act like 5, and then you could deal with that eventually when you get a better jewel.
Right. Right. Right.
Because
Yeah.
again, dying feels bad. So
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I just experienced that last night with the gauntlet. Normally, I don't play hardcore, And there's a reason
Yep.
for that. Obviously, I'm not the most skilled player as far as just skills go in the game. But yeah, I died a few times last night, so that was pretty rough.
Bummer. Yeah.
Especially when you play for like 4 hours and then all of a sudden you just get one shotted out of nowhere. The gauntlet's pretty nuts though. It's kind of an outlier, but
Yep.
just switching over to back over to offense. So like when you're scaling damage, like what's the best way to approach scaling your damage? Can you just like walk me through what your process is as far as like when you're putting together a build, you have your skill, you have the tooltip. Like what are you looking at? Are you just looking at the tags? Are you looking at the type of damage that it does? Like how are you
Yeah.
scaling the damage?
So the tags are good to represent certain things. The biggest thing is certain damage types fall in certain buckets. So for example, if you're doing fire damage, you have base access to ignite. If you're either have an amount of ignite or you're critting, so then there's crit and non-crit becomes a discussion. If you're doing chaos, you have access to poison because that's what chaos damage can poison. So it kind of it's a self-solving thing when you actually have your skill. So you mentioned the tag. So Forbidden Rite of Soul Sacrifice, we'll use another example. It's a spell that has AoE and Chaos Projectile, meaning you could scale it any way you would scale a spell, and you can scale AoE damage and projectile damage and speed, and then Chaos. So spell AoE projectile doesn't really have any sort of modality change for damage that would be like unlocking something special. But Chaos, again, you could go poison or you could just do hit based. And if you're doing hit based, is there any benefit to being not crit? The answer is no. So then you would go crit based. So it then becomes the two buckets being either crit based or poison based. So then you just pick one depending on your preference.
Mm-hmm.
That's just kind of where that would go. And then it becomes the projectile and AoE means. So now we've established our damage type, we'll say, is crit. You can use the projectiles to scale our speed, at which the time the damage is delivered, because projectile speed means getting from point A to point B faster. And then AoE means we scale up our area of effect, so we have a larger area in which we're doing it. And because the AoEs overlap, we can actually get more single target out of more AoE. And the fact that it's a spell, meaning we could invest in cast speed or use echo or do things like the mastery that lets you open up chests, which is ridiculously important in this league for some
Mm-hmm.
reason.
Yeah.
So things like that. So you can start to kind of carve out like a marble sculpture, what you want to build and how you want to build it. And then you can start to think about things like, ooh, what awaken gems there? Which ones can I use? Would I rather use volley or I use GMP for a projectile? Because if I use GMP, then I can get awaken GMP eventually,
Mm-hmm.
so that just becomes like part of the thought process. And then you get to start going thinking further, which is like, all right, do I want to use a 6 link? Do I want to use maybe a 4 link or some sort of double influenced, artificial 8 link type thing, either a helmet or a glove, or do I use a wand and a squire? And you start getting as much damage, and then you start eking out as much potential as possible. But it's a very progressive thing because you could start with a 6 link in your body, and then be like, all right, now I want to transition to this next stage of the build. So that's where using the time machine function on POE.NINJA is so useful. You
Mm-hmm.
could see players as they progress. If you're talking about trying to look at builds and study the progression of a build, that time machine function I think is the most important thing that we've ever had for people curious about that. Because you could see, oh, day one, you could see these top 10 players. I would definitely never look at one person. Look at like a array of people because person is dumb, but people are pretty smart.
Right, right.
When you start
Collectively,
looking at a few of
we're a
them,
lot
yeah, we're
we're a
okay.
lot more intelligent. Right, right.
Yeah.
But
So,
for people that don't know what the time machine function is that you're talking about, in the top right
yep,
corner when you're looking at builds on POE.NINJA, there is a snapshot drop down on the
yep.
top right, and you can drop that down. And a lot of the time, I don't really know what determines whether or not it's grayed out. Like you know how when you look at it, sometimes like before
The
week
characters
one is.
deleted normally is how it is.
Oh, okay.
If a certain amount of characters get deleted, or that skill is no longer used at that bracket, because it during Settlers you could even view people day one, and that league was a year long. So
Right.
it's normally it's just if some qualifier prevented it from being viewed is what
Okay.
happens.
Okay.
Because a lot of times, especially in trade, players will when they finish they just delete their characters, which is
Mm-hmm.
annoying for people viewing stuff, but it just happens. Or their profiles are set to private, for example. So that sort of stuff can prevent it. But for the most part, if you're looking at, especially a build that's like a little bit awkward to transition into, because playing a CI chaos caster that's using, gloves as you're casting out of, which is what Forbidden Rite is at the moment. It's like that. It's like, all right, how do I, getting from A to Z is a little bit confusing. So that's
Right.
where you could look at day one, day two, day three, and you could be like, oh, they did this, then they did this because of this. and you can kind of start to understand it yourself. That's where I really think it's important to like the kind of teach a man to fish thing. So if you could learn to navigate PoE Ninja and even just start looking at profiles, and there's a heat map section there that's really useful to understand like, oh, everybody's doing this. And it's not always, oh, everyone's doing it, it must be good. Sometimes, again, people are just dumb and we do bad things. But for the most part, like a general rule, looking at the heat map is like, oh, everyone's getting this because it's probably the most point efficient, which is,
Right.
if you really want to boil down path in the most unfun way possible, right? Nothing matters for skills, gems. It's all just adding numbers, right? So it's what adds the most efficient combination of numbers, whether you're getting it from a tattoo or from a jewel or from a gem or from gear, from your ascendancy. It's like none of it really matters. It all just boils down to the number, which is so it's just what is the most efficient route to get those best numbers, which is where the heat map is particularly useful for. Because it's like everyone's getting this 2 point, therefore it's probably the most efficient 2 point. I should get it too. And
Yeah,
that
I
kind of
can.
works out.
I completely forgot about this function. To be honest with you, about the heat map.
Mhm.
This is a really really good. Can you kind of explain to people what this does?
Sure. So a heat map in general shows more heat-based colors, so more towards red if it's being traveled or used more frequently. So in the heat map on PoE.NINJA, you'll see people pathing their passive tree, and the areas which are marked red or gradient from yellow to red or orange are going to be the paths that are more traveled. So, for example, on the passive tree, you have a 3 point node called Arcane Potency in the top left, which is a crit rate and crit multi for spells. That one's probably marked red because almost everybody grabs it because it's the most efficient 4 point crit node plus mastery. So that's like you'll if you see it marked red, it's because this is probably like a mandatory routing for the build. Same thing for like the aura nodes or the keystones. You'll always see those lit up because everyone's who's playing this is using CI, so CI is going to be bright red because it's a mandatory click. So using that as a great way of being like, oh, I know if I want to go left or right, out of which, or that sort of stuff.
Hmm. That's really fascinating. So you can actually see this is a really good way to tell like all the different variations of the type of build you're trying to play too. Like so you can
Yep.
pick a skill and then you can click on show the passive heat map and then you can see all the different variations that people use for this and how
Yep.
common they're used. This is a really really good tool. I can't believe
And
I forgot about this. This is crazy.
to that point, it gets really complicated in path because of jewels. Jewels kind of throw a monkey wrench in pathing. So you'll see like when you're talking about forbidden right. If anybody, and this is typical of anybody, if everyone paths to the Scion starting area and starts grabbing those jewel sockets, it's most likely they're running a natural instinct plus light of meaning plus maybe even might of the meek.
Right.
If if you're not running those jewels, you wouldn't path there. So you wouldn't necessarily maybe know that unless you look at their profile and or see the pattern. So when it comes to like you knowing the heat map, but also you have to have a little bit of background knowledge of jewel placement because a lot of it also matters for tattoos, which don't display on PoE.NINJA like just base value. So, for example, in that build, you run Red Nightmare in the far left jewel socket near the agnostic. Now, you would have no idea why you'd run Red Nightmare there unless you actually opened up their profile or imported them into POB, and then you realize that oh, they're putting fire res tattoos and all those strength nodes. That's
Right,
why it's
right,
there
right. Or
because it's just yeah,
or using voices, right? Like it would be the same kind of
sure,
thing. Like if they're using the adorned and they're just like using a bunch
yeah.
of voices and stuff just to get multiple jewel sagas. That would work kind of the similar way.
It's especially prevalent, I would say, for things like timeless jewels because they're going to be overriding notables quite often.
Right.
So if someone's using an Emperor's timeless jewel, you have no idea why they're using it, why they grabbing a strength in their dex note if they're already well kept, why they grabbing this weird notable. It's because it's being overridden. So that's
Hmm.
like that sort of stuff isn't super obvious. Or in the same thing for keystones, like why is this the guy picking up agnostic? He's not. It's being overridden into inner conviction with their Templar jewel because that's you just can't display it obviously. So it's like just like POB, like PoE.NINJA, they're all tools. It's like having a hammer or a chisel. If you
Hmm.
don't know how to use them, they're just a hunk of metal. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it takes a little bit of know-how.
One of the powerful tools that I found when trying to put together builds is in POB, and it uses the show node power option.
Yep.
Are you familiar with that? What that does?
No, you have to
So
elaborate more.
yeah, so at the bottom of a POB, when you're on the passive tree, you can actually click Show Node Power, and what it'll do is you can. There's a little bit of a drop down menu, and
Yeah,
you can put combined DPS, total DPS, just
got
hit
it.
DPS, and then it'll build a report for you
Yeah,
of the most powerful nodes that you can path to that will increase that number. Now that can be
yeah,
really obviously misleading because like as we discussed, we're talking about like uptime and stuff. I played some builds that have a lot of DPS that don't feel very good to play at all. So
yeah.
it can be a little bit misleading, but that is also a really powerful tool, especially if you're kind of stuck on the passive tree. You don't really know where you should try to go. But yeah, that's a really good tool as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, just as far as like, I want to kind of stay on offenses for a bit. What are
Sure.
the like when you mentioned going crit, right? So, can you
Yep.
just explain to people what that means? I mean, obviously, people that have a little bit of game knowledge are going to know what crit means, but
Mhm.
what are some of the things that you have? What is mandatory when you're building a crit based build?
I mean, the ultimate answer to that question is the investment worth the damage you're getting? So if I'm investing supports and 20 points in the passive tree and a flask, and I'm investing in crit rate, but I would have just gotten more damage going LE overload, it isn't worth it. Same thing for like a lot of slam builds will go precise technique for 40% more if not critting. So there's routes to go that aren't crit. It used to be crit was like the end all be all. It's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the case anymore.
Right.
There's definitely routes to go that give you more damage than you'll ever need in a build and aren't crit. So yeah, it comes to if you're playing an attack build, can you run crit? Do you have to deal with accuracy? Do you want to deal with that? Is that annoying? Like for a caster, it's a lot easier because
Mm-hmm.
you could just power charge stack eventually, and
Right.
power charge stacking basically makes you crit capped by virtue of just the amount of charges you have. So you have to do very little actual crit investment with a power charge build to just be crit capped. But if you feel like sometimes the juice just isn't worth the squeeze, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if the build doesn't have like Forbidden Right has a talk about tags, it has a 6% crit chance. Not all skills have the same crit base crit rate.
Right.
Some have different ones. So if you were trying to force crit on a build that had like a really low base crit rate, it would probably feel pretty poopy, you know. And then
Mm-hmm.
versus others, so that's something to consider in general, like if you're applying status effects, crits become better because when you crit with any amount of elemental damage, you automatically apply that status effect for the most part.
Right.
So you get access to shock, and that sort of things, and that becomes another avenue of damage scaling. But it just depends on the archetype you're at. Again, like certain ailments don't really scale too well into crit unless you pick up, perfect agony, which is really far on the right side of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from that, it just depends on what you're trying to further. Minions don't typically like to crit too much because it's kind of hard to get their crit super high. But yeah, I mean, crit just becomes an obvious route for a lot of casters and a lot of endgame builds if you can afford it because there's a lot of the more opulent ways to build your character, whether it's charge stacking or stat stacking, that just ends up being like you just get a ton of crit as a byproduct. And even more so when you have access to things like Mage Blood, so you just have a scaled up Diamond Flask active all the time.
Right. Yeah, that's a
So
big chunk of that's like I think it
yeah,
ends up being like what 15% crit chance when it's all the way
it's a
scaled.
lot.
Yeah.
So in this league, for example, crit normally you would really never play a crit slam build. It kind of was just again not worth the effort considering precise technique existed, and that was
Mm-hmm.
just an easy way to do crit or not do crit. But there's an infamy mod on helmets from mercenaries that is like one of the infamous rare modifiers that gives you base crit per war cry. Recently, in slam builds are using 7 war cries, so that pretty much almost damn near crit caps them just from existing. So that's like an example of something was introduced or injected into the pool of options, which is the infamous hell modifier through mercenaries. That's like, oh, so now we could route crit instead of going the typical echoes of creation shaper helmet or precise technique build. So sometimes things like that unlock or crack open,
Mm-hmm.
but for the most part, it's like yeah, casters I would say tend to lean towards crit. People using claws or daggers typically lean towards crit. But a lot of times it's just again it just isn't worth it because you have things like ephemeral edge being very popular and you can get resolute technique as a corruption of that. So things where you could just not have to deal with accuracy because accuracy sucks to deal with. So
Right.
if you could just be like, I'm just gonna go RT and then just have a bunch of damage, and that's great too. That's even better. So
Right. Yeah. That when I very first started playing, because I'm pretty new to the game in comparison to you, obviously. I
yeah,
started in Trials of the Ancestors,
sure.
and then I quit really shortly after start because I was trying to do my own thing, not really having any game knowledge. I got pretty frustrated, but I did come back in Affliction. So as far as the as far as like ignite builds and poison
Mhm.
builds, can you kind of just break down like how those mechanics work, just as far as applying the damage? Like obviously, if you critical strike, you apply the ailment. Are there ways to go around that? Just like how does the damage work, just from a very
So
base perspective?
if you crit, you always apply an elemental ailment status. If you have damage of that type, the magnitude of that ailment is based off of the amount of the damage you have, like flat damage pre-scaling. So if you have a little bit of fire, it'll be a little baby ignite. If you have a little bit of lightning, it'll be a 1% shock.
Hmm.
Poison is if doesn't happen as a base function. I don't automatically poison because I'm critting with chaos damage, so it's not the same in that way. You have to have an amount of poison on hit to do it. But poison can be done with chaos damage, which is the whatever, or physical damage.
Hmm.
But yeah, for the most part. If so, when it comes to scaling dots, they're all kind of different in functions. You have like the base, I would say the base three dots are going to be bleeds, and you have poisons, and you have ignites. And this isn't like a hardline rule, but bleeds you have one of, and they do more damage when they're aggravated or the target is moving,
Hmm.
which is aggravated is just the debuff that says it's like you're moving. And then you can use things like Crimson Dance to go above the bleed cap of 8 times. It takes the biggest hit, reapplies it. Same with ignite. Ignites one big dot unless you're using replica Ember Wake. Then it's or that actually that's fine, but it gives you prod speed, but not an extra one. But I digress. There's a so that's like one big dot, and then poison just stacks to a billion. Then you get a bunch of little dots that keep stacking up and falling off.
Hmm.
So they're like different in their form and function. So you don't really need to have super high attack speed for an ignite build or a bleed build where you would like them with poison, but you actually still want to have high application of those things for bleed and ignite because the more you're reapplying them, the more you're high rolling to a higher base one because your damage because a range, right? You have a minimum and maximum amount of damage. So you could like low roll a bleed or low roll a poison, and then that's why you use things like volatility very commonly to try to, whatever, give you a bigger range so you have a higher top end
Right.
igniter or a bleed. But yeah, the status effect builds are really good early on because they typically scale quite well with tree and gem levels and descendancies. And then again, it comes back to damage uptime being really easy. So that's why things like bleed builds are really popular or basic ignite builds are really popular because you just like you get pretty much a million damage for free, and then that's normally enough to clear most of the stuff in the Atlas. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
What would you say is like a what would you say is a good DPS to kind of shoot for, just to kind of do everything as far as like Atlas completion, getting your void stones, just very basic stuff. What would you
A
say
couple
is like
mil,
a
like a
couple
couple, like
million?
2 to 3 mil's fine. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome, man. So look, let's switch back over to defense real quick. Just kind of I know you've already laid out just how important being immune to all the debuffs are.
Mhm.
What are some of the other benchmarks that you go for when you are scaling into defense? Like what obviously you want to pay attention to where you're at on the tree, just for people who have very basic knowledge of the game. But what are you trying to do? Like just for both evasion, suppression, for armor, for resistances, that kind of stuff. What are you looking for mainly? Like what are your
So
bare minimums?
for yeah, so aside from just getting every single debuff immunity humanly possible, always for every build, like what we talked about, like shock or corrupting blood, that sort of stuff. When it comes to defenses, it really you're kind of a little bit shoehorned into what you pick depending on where you are in the tree.
Mm-hmm.
Like the defenses in the left side of the tree are very different than the right. There's like no suppression left side of the tree. There's really no block on the right side, kind of. So it's like if it depends on what you want to do, but like you would. at base value, you kind of pick two or three things, and you go narrow and deep is typically better. So block is very good this league. So if like you're gonna go block, you're gonna go cap block, and that's a pretty huge investment. Then you can say, all right, I'd like some other form of something, whether that's having a big old life pool with ES or it's having a bunch of armor. So you kind of I would pick like two things and then go into them.
Okay.
The easy way to do it, I'm sure you could do this in POB, but if you could just type in like suppression, and again, like much like a heat map, you'll see, oh, it's all on the right side of the tree. So if I'm
Right.
playing a right side build, I should probably go suppression as my form of spell mitigation versus trying to really, really force spell block for some reason. You know, so that it kind of solves itself. Again, if you're like in the bottom of the tree, you're picking armor or evasion or both
Right.
because that's where a lot of that's represented. So a lot of path honestly is like illusion of choice. It looks quite daunting because there's these lot of options, but when you start to just very basically shave off what you're trying to accomplish, all it kind of all falls away, and there's like you're left with two or three options realistically. You
Right.
know,
Yeah, that was one of the things that I had that I pointed out, like at least to myself when I very first started, because everybody said that they'd open up the passive tree and they just immediately Alt F4 because they're like, "What the fuck is this?" But
yeah,
once you break it down, like with whatever class you pick is going to determine where you start on the tree, unless you're picking like a Scion, which makes
yeah,
it a little bit more complicated, but not really. But if you just break it down, like you're basically limited to this part of the tree. Like you can only
yeah,
go so far unless you're playing something like a Bama build where you have to kind of path all the way across, like to get
sure,
some of
sure,
the
yeah,
bow nodes or something. But if you're not doing anything like that, then it's pretty straightforward. But I
yeah.
know it confused me a lot. At least I don't know about other people, but like just the defenses themselves, like the defensive layers, really confused me. Like as far as like
Sure. Yeah.
what should I put more into? Like how powerful is spell suppression? Like how powerful is evasion
Well,
compared to
the
armor? Like
one thing I would say is in PoE, if you're not 100%, you may as well be 0% when it comes to reaching caps on things
okay,
because of how often you're rolling the dice for chance of occurrence. What I mean by that is if you have 99% chance to suppress, you may as well have zero because you're going to roll that 1% every map multiple times.
right,
Right? You're being hit, you're being engaged with so frequently that not having the absolute amount of that defense makes it unreliable. And unreliability is an absolute killer in this game, which is why things like Mage Blood are so powerful because it all does is enables consistency, which makes your character feel infinitely 1,000 times better. So you would never build 99% suppression or 99% ailment immunity if you can help it. And I would always rather have that than like any amount of life in general. Like a couple thousand life can get you pretty much to red maps if you're ailment immune suppressed. I mean, because it is absolutely staggering how much damage you're taking from random bullshit that you don't even realize. Like spell suppression, you're taking half damage. If you're blocking, you're taking no damage. If you're not taking elemental status effects, you're taking significantly reduced damage. You're no longer getting ignites. You're no longer frozen. So it's like it just solves so many problems. So if you could, in general, as like a rule of thumb, talking about progressing your character by Act 4, I'd want to have corrupting blood immunity by the time I get to walking towards Malachi. By Act 5 or 6, I'd like to have, if I don't have at least a couple thousand life, I'd like to have stun immunity because getting stun locked is going to kill you. And then by the time I'm hitting maps, I'm going to start working on suppression and spell block because spell damage just comes out of left field. And then start thinking about, do I want to run, like typically on day one of League of launch weekend, my two auras are going to be Purity of Elements plus either Determination or Grace, every single build because I need to be res capped. I don't want to die, and I don't want to be statused. And
right.
until I get Storm Shroud or Ancestral Vision or some way of getting ailment immunity, that Purity of Elements is not coming off me. Full stop. Because I do like it is nothing feels worse than being bogged down.
Right.
So that's where it's like you're taking. It's not really like you're not being shot in the head and path. It's death by 1,000 cuts, really.
Right.
It's
Right.
like
Right.
there's so many little things that are killing you, but most of those things are debuffs and status effects, really. So it's like once you start resolving those, it's surprising how little damage most things do, really. I mean, it's like if you're no longer able to be shocked or bled or poisoned, it's like wow, nothing really hurts. So
Can,
that's
can
definitely the priority. Yeah.
can you touch on so like for players that are they're they have game experience, but they're just getting into this, right? So what are some surefire ways to go ailment immunity sans a mage blood? Like
Purity of elements. I mean, that's the easiest way. Running the aura makes you element. But aside from that, you basically only have two options. You have Storm Shroud, which, to be fair, is very good with Mage Blood because you can get shock avoidance on a flask. So Storm Shroud is a jewel that says your shock avoidance also applies to your other elemental ailments, your ignite, your freeze, etc. So
mhm.
the easy way to get that doesn't really exist. The way you do it is you typically use essence to craft shock avoidance on your boots, and then you use either Exarch to put more shock avoidance on your boots, and then you
Mhm.
use one abyssal jewel, and bam, you're at 100%. Or you could use two abyssal jewels in Darkness Enthroned, or if you get perfect ones. But Storm Shroud's one of them. That's a big drop in SSF, typically pretty expensive in trade early on because it's just the easiest way to get element immunity. The other version is Ancestral Vision, which is kind of the same thing, but it scales off of suppression. So if you're a right side of the tree kind of build and you're already going for suppression, normally Ancestral gets you pretty much half the way to ailment cap. And then you could finish it off with like one or two clusters on tree. There's not too many, but there's one, I believe it's called the Crystal Skin one on the bottom right, that has 20% chance to avoid, and then another 20% leading up to it, so that gets you 40, and then there's like 8% from thick skin. So on that bottom side of the tree, ancestral plus 6 points means you're ailment immune,
Mhm.
and that's another easy way to do it. Aside from that, though, the biggest threat again is shock. Shock is the one that's going to get you the most
Okay.
because chill and freeze you could kind of resolve with either Brine King or you could craft on boots can't be frozen. So that's
Right.
done.
Right.
Ignite is just not as big of a problem, but if it really was a big problem, you could put on Soul of Abrath and now it's 60% less duration. But it
Mhm.
shouldn't be a problem because it's just not that scary. Shock is a killer. Shock is easy to resolve with Tempest Shield if you're using a shield. It grants immunity to shock. So that's the easiest way to resolve it from there.
Okay.
Um, Aside from that, those are the main ways. And like I said, legit, I'll just be using Purity of Elements, until
Right. Right.
like
Right.
100. I'll use it just because I don't want to die, and it's just comfy. So
So the good focus would be just on the elemental ailments. That's like the main
that's a
killers you would
big
say.
top priority. I would say corrupting blood, bleed, poison, stun, ailments. Those are the big things early on.
Okay.
Um, some of them you just can't resolve early on. It's really hard. Again, like bleed or poison, it kind of becomes which one's worse. If you are more scared of bleed, Soul of Ralakesh covers that. Poison's a little bit harder, but that's where that protection mastery that says the damaging elements can't be inflicted while you already have one that takes care of that.
Right. Right. Right.
Soul of Arakali. Arakali helps with Chaos Dot. Typically, people don't have a ton of Chaos Res early on. It's one of the harder reses to cap because it's just less value. There's
Mhm.
less. It simply rolls lower on gear, right? The cap is 32 versus 48 as a top end roll, so it just rolls less. And it's actually weighted, I believe, less on gear to roll, so you're just less likely to have it. So chaos is a bit of a spooky thing early on. And for stun, unwavering stance is easy, but if again you could use the Brine King, gives you stun recovery or
Right.
stun immunity. So pantheons are very very important. I'd say pantheons, masteries, those sort of things really help for defensive layers. But whatever I'm explaining now typically is going to change by about 20% each patch,
Right.
because whatever is best or whatever is most accessible kind of rotates around. So like whether it used to be like really like Determination Grace used to be way better, then they got nerfed and they're way worse. Now they're good again. So it just kind of ebbs and flows.
Right. Yeah. I like to cover things just as like a very base because I'm pretty sure that the
Yeah.
ailment immunities aren't really going to change. I mean, unless they do something crazy with like purity of elements or
Yeah.
something.
So they've added three since Delirium, which is Scorch, Brittle, and Sap.
Right.
Those aren't too prevalent really in the enemies, but yeah, you do get they are elemental ailments, so you are immune to them when you have those ailment immunity things.
Yeah. I
But they're
didn't.
not really that
Um.
prevalent. Yeah.
I didn't know how. I didn't know how powerful the Pantheon was. There was when I very first started playing.
Yep.
A lot of people. I guess I'm probably not the only one, but there's like literally zero things that explain it. I mean, once you kill the first boss in Act 6, you get access to it, but
Yeah.
there's really nothing explaining like how to unlock the rest of it. Like it's really
Yeah.
nothing like
There's
in
nothing in game that tells you anything really.
yeah,
It's
which
there's a help panel in the bottom right. I believe it's like semicolon opens it or something.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't been updated in 7 years.
Oh, wow.
So there's very little update going into that. I mean, an intern in a weekend could fix it, but hopefully one day it gets some love. But yeah, there's that's why I tend to just recommend checking out the wiki
Right.
or glean what you can, learn what you can. There's a lot of good people that make like kind of more like noob videos about like
Mm-hmm.
you're just starting Path, like Zizarin does that sort of stuff. I think
Yeah, he
where it's
had
like you just started
the
Path,
Path of
enjoy this.
Exile Academy or whatever it was. That
Sure.
video
Yeah.
series he did
Perfect.
was really,
Yeah. Yeah.
really good. He had a very clear and concise way. This is why I started making like crafting content. It's because a lot of the
Yeah.
time you're watching crafting videos and you have zero idea what they're even talking about. They're using language that's miles ahead of you because you just started.
Correct.
And so I started making videos where I would kind of break down the crafting steps, but I would also break down why with like little screenshots of Craft of Exile showing like the
Yeah.
tags
Great.
and why you make the decisions. So that way you can at least take that knowledge and apply it to other things. If you're not crafting that one thing that's in the video, you're kind of burnt. You know,
Yep.
you're not going to be doing anything. So I wanted to ask you, what would you say is a good build or a good skill or something like that, where somebody who's just getting into making builds what's an easy thing that they could scale? It's just as far as like a skill goes, like a spell or
Well,
attack.
yeah. I mean, it's really all goes to preference ultimately because there's no clear cut answer. I
Right.
typically lean people towards playing a caster over a melee because it's just a much more palatable experience.
Mm-hmm.
So just doing something like a lightning caster. I mean, it used to be Arc was the meme as like the ultimate noob build because it effectively auto targets, right? So
Okay.
something just like an Arc Elementalist. Thankfully, Elementalist was buffed so much this league,
Right.
right, through the golem stuff that if you just play any caster with quad golems, you're basically just fucking chilling. Like it's so easy and so comfy. It takes care of your res, your defenses, your mana, your everything. So any elementalist caster, you're pretty much gonna be fine. It
Right.
it covers so many of your bases, like using those golems. Or I'm talking about fancy, jewel stacking stuff with gold. Just like literally using Arc and a four link, you probably get to red maps with the golems.
Oh
So
wow. Okay. I haven't tried it. I know they buffed it, but I hadn't actually put together a
so
build
they
with
just
golems.
they cover all of your concerns. They give you defenses, cast speed, crit rate, chaos res, life. I mean, they give you like 400 life rate for having stone golem out on elementalist. So it's like it kind of just makes you really really easy. That would be like if I'd recommend any sort of like I'm a noob. This is the Ascensi for sure. Elementalist.
Okay.
That's the one to go for at the moment.
And
Super comfy.
you would say just any lightning build would be good for that? Is there
Yeah, any self cast, and you could do any self cast hit build. You could is going to be totally fine as an elementalist. Basically, you could do ignite if you wanted to, and anything because again, elementalist has with the ignite thing. It says all your damage can ignite, so you could literally use any skill you want to, and it works. But yeah, I mean, just because of just the way elementals is with golems, and it has just such generic scaling with ailments, it just is super super comfy. And the
right?
golems again make it so I mean, Chaos Golem gives you like 70 Chaos Res, so it's really, really easy to just plug and play, kind of.
Yeah, 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 for sure. That's actually a really good idea. I might actually try that out too. I haven't messed with the golems at all this league, so
Yep.
yeah. So, have you played any Path of Exile 2? Have you dabbled at all, or are you kind of just steering
I
clear until?
have.
Okay.
I very much don't like it for like I guess, political reasons. I guess I don't know how to describe it, but there's a lot of history with PoE 2 and its creation, and then the treatment of PoE 1 because of PoE 2. So
Right.
I really pretty much am just waiting for the 1.0 launch
Okay.
because yeah, and hopefully PoE 1 doesn't get shafted too much more because of its existence. But
Yeah, that was that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way when that happened. So
yeah, for the most part, I just think the PoE 1 is such a better game, like beyond miles better at the moment, and I think it'll take literally 4 or 5 years for PoE 2 to even come close.
oh wow.
So currently, that's yeah,
Like is have you experimented with making builds in PoE 2 at all, or have you
yeah. So I played 100 hours on launch, and
okay.
and I played four different builds to maps. So I definitely played in a variety of builds as well.
So for
Yeah,
the people that are PoE2 heads, because I do have a lot of people that play PoE2 as well.
sure.
What's the main difference between the two games, just as far as like build
Well,
creation goes?
ultimately, the first thing I'd like to say is the best game is the one you have the most fun playing for any video game, full stop. If you're not having fun, it's I wouldn't play it. And if you're having fun, then no one else matters, right? That's the
Right,
ultimate thing because it's a video game. So
right.
if you love PoE2 and it's your favorite game, God bless. Enjoy your, have fun. Some of the examples though, I would say that are like objective versus subjective points of failure in PoE2 when it comes to how it works is I can give a couple examples for melee, for example. So there's three main points I would say. Number one is knockback in PoE2 is forced with the stun mechanic in melee, which feels quite bad. So when you hit something hard enough, it stuns, and they get knocked back typically out of melee range, which feels bad. That's no bueno. Number two, when you're using WASD, which the game is very much pitched to be using, WASD movement versus mouse and keyboard,
Right.
you can't name lock. You can't name lock with skills with melee. What name locking is if I were to use a strike skill or something and I click on an enemy, it drags me into minimum distance so I can attack them. Otherwise, I'm just swinging in the middle of the air. It does the second thing. You just swing in the air and you just miss. So I'd be right clicking on an enemy in PoE2 with melee, and I'm just swinging into the air. So that feels bad. Then the third thing I think I experienced that was pretty tangible was that there's a floor to attack speed scaling for slam skills. So no matter if I had 1 billion% attack speed, my Sunder's never going to go off faster than zero point 0.9 seconds. There's literally a minimum animation speed. What that means is I'm always trading hits. Every time I try to attack anything, I'm trading a hit. So a lot of things like that, the common criticism when it comes to PoE2 or any other ARPG, when we have so many examples to look at now, is there's just these are problems that were beyond solved for 5, 10 years, right? These are things that have been identified and solved. So why are we making the same mistakes, kind of? So a lot of those things exist in PoE2. It's like we had a perfectly good car that just needed a fresh coat of paint,
Hmm.
and they thought, what if we just remake the car from scratch for no reason? So that's what it feels like for a lot of. And there's tons of more examples,
Right,
but
right.
yeah, just like that sort of stuff is kind of goofy to me.
Yeah, a lot of people don't like the skill gem, the support gem thing, where you can only
Yeah, you
use
can't
one.
de-level someone. It's really strange, and you can only use one at a time. But there are a lot of so like to on a positive note, PoE2 has a far superior glossary system and tutorial system,
Right.
which is just ripped from Last Epic. It's like one-to-one copied over, but
Hmm.
that's doesn't matter because it is the superior system. Having it so you could view in a glossary all the abilities, the debuffs, what they do, click on the named things, and they're all hyperlinks to each other. Great. That should be in PoE1 without question. So that sort of system's amazing. Pause was a big thing that we now have in PoE1. Great
Right.
system. WASD movement. There's kind of no really explanation why you couldn't have that optional because there's existing controller support in Path 1. They could just shoehorn it in probably. It wouldn't be perfect, but it's something. So there's like tons of examples, or even like you could argue the spirit system for auras is an interesting idea that I think could be looked at in PoE1. So there's not that there's it's not a hopeless pile of shit. It's
Right,
just
right, right.
there's just
Well, yeah, I mean,
I think there's more wrong than right at the moment by a pretty large
it's
margin. So there's
essentially just a beta access game right now. I mean, it's they're going to be
it
making a
is.
ton of changes. It's probably going to be unrecognizable by the time it fully comes out, and then it's going to
Yeah,
iterate from there. I mean, obviously, you've been playing PoE1 since the very beginning. I'm sure that this
very
game is
different.
also
Yes.
unrecognizable from the very
So
beginning.
imagine playing Path. So imagine it's just a time machine. You're right. Imagine playing PoE where there's no loot filters. Number one, you're constantly desyncing because you have to be hitting. You have to make your own OOS macro to resync your character because it's going out of sync every 2 seconds.
Oh wow.
Loot is free for all, so you would want to play melee so you could reach loot faster than your party mates, which was a thing. So there's like so many weird things. No, there's no Atlas tree. It's just you put a map in and you be happy. It's just like the game was so flaccid compared to what it is now. Without question, it's 1 billion% better. And I
Right.
hope that in 5 years, PoE, two is some semblance of that would be great.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be, man. I mean, the community seems to have a big impact on the way that they develop these games. So I'm assuming it's not going to go down the same road as Diablo did, where they're just making a bunch of terrible decisions, and it's
Time will tell.
just yeah, right. Well, we'll see.
My only hope is that if PoE goes to shit, that we get an offline mode so I could just still play it.
Right,
That's
right. Well, I
hope.
honestly, I think with the response from this league, especially, I mean, they if you would have taken out the server issues that were in the very beginning, because the servers are just, I don't understand what goes on with that, but you would think that would be fixed by now. But the server issues, I think they would have surpassed the Dawn of the Hunt release with the amount of players that they had. I don't know. I think that they came really, really close, and then a lot of people were just running into a lot of issues. So that's why they just
It was
stopped
like
playing.
weeks. I mean, I was, for example, crashing 20 times the stream for the first 2 weeks.
Oh,
Basically.
wow.
It was pretty substantial.
Okay.
Now, I'm not. There's nothing else I'm doing in life, so I'm just going to keep playing. But if anybody respected their own time with themselves, I would 100% imagine they would just play a different game at that point because it's a bit rough. And I think a lot of that sort of stuff, the infrastructural issues, whether it's between the server issues or the community support or customer support or the supporter pack physical shipping things, these are all things that kind of fell through the cracks, I think, because of PoE2 they're just spread so thin. And they're also trying to make PoE mobile and also porting the game to console. Like, it's just, they're doing way too much, I think, in general.
Right.
I think if they just focused on one thing, whatever that thing would be I would prefer that than just like instead of having like 3.5, 2.5 games running at 60% efficacy.
Right. I bring this up every time, but did you catch the Q&A that Jonathan did in China?
I did not. I don't really watch anything PoE2 related, except
Okay.
I'm just gonna because so for me a large portion of Path of Exile is about your progression and working on items, that sort of stuff. And PoE2 is effectually voided until 1.0 launch because the game's going to go into a separate segregated standard, which is not going to be the core standard that leagues are going to rotate into. So
Mm-hmm.
it's effectively voided until 1.0. So I just don't really care too much until then
Right.
because any progress I make will be lost. So, which to be fair is why they're not caring about so much about things like issues with duping or bugs or that sort of stuff because it's like it's all going to be sent to limbo anyway eventually.
Right. Well, the
Um,
reason why I brought it up is because a lot of the things that are in PoE2 seem to also influence PoE1, and one of the things that I wanted to bring
sure,
up
yeah,
was they were talking about the system with the pause, where you can pause and highlight a monster, and it'll tell you how much damage you'll do to that monster, which was really fascinating. I thought that was a really cool thing. They were talking about this
yeah,
instead of a practice dummy, so that you
yeah.
could pause the game, highlight, and then you could see how much damage you're going to do to that mob. So I thought that was really fascinating that they were gonna
So I
do
think that
that.
sounds cool in theory. However, it does kind of sound like a practice dummy just with a bunch of clunk and friction behind it. Like I would rather just have a practice. If I cared about checking that sort of thing, why would I have to do it in a stressful environment versus do it's kind of the same concept of saying, oh, you could pause to read debuffs, right? Versus having the debuff glossary. It's like
Right.
I could if it becomes present and I could catch it in time and I'm not in a boss fight because I can't pause pinnacle bosses.
Right.
So it's like yeah, that kind of works, but it just seems like there's a lot of kind of an ongoing joke in PoE about like we've said since literally 12 years ago, which was game is free, no bitching for the longest time because it's like,
Right.
but there's a lot of things where it's like they introduced a good idea and then they just strapped on friction for no reason. Where it's like, well, so you're telling me you have the technology to make training dummies, but you don't want to give it to us and you want to lock it behind this me checking a pause and then trying to highlight a boss and hoping I'm in an area where I'm allowed to pause.
Right.
I'd rather just have the train dummy if I cared about that.
Yeah. It was
So
a.
that's
There's a
it's a
lot of
step in the
that.
right direction, maybe. But yeah,
I noticed that there's a lot of that where they just create like artificial friction, like with the trading. It's really strange. Like
sure,
the reason why they
yeah,
said like, oh well, we want trading to have some kind of friction But it's strange. Why you want people exiting out of your game and going on to a third party site, or just a site in general, any
A
website, just to.
fantastic question. We've been asking it for years.
Well, they did. He did bring up in the Q&A that they are going to be adding something similar to the currency exchange for trading. So I'm
Yeah.
assuming that once that is tested and vetted in PoE2, that it will make its way to PoE1 eventually. So
The fear in that is a little bit that there's been a trade system in console for 3-4 years now
mhm.
that is so atrocious if you don't know how it operates. Where I'm going to paraphrase how it works, but it's essentially like, say I wanted to get a Death's Rush ring. I basically have to look up ring, and then I have to parse through 1,000 quad tabs and looking for like Death's Rush. That's basically how that's basically how it works. And then I put in like 8C, and then the guy gets back to me. It's
Oh
like
wow.
the system was so shit, and that's been improved a little bit since then. But it was basically like looking for a rare. Like I would type in diamond ring. I don't even know if
Hmm.
it actually let me even do diamond. Because I've tried this a couple times through some friends who were doing a console. And by the way, those friends got to level 80 and were like rank one because it's like desolate in console. But
Right, right, right.
but it'd be like, all right, I want to get a diamond ring that like has like tri-res. It's like, okay, so I look up rare diamond ring. And then I just get to look from page for page for page of rares and just try to see what has. Like, there's no way to filter anything really. So I'm
So,
just
so,
really,
so, so there's no stat filters at all.
there wasn't last I saw it. There may have been improved slightly, but it's pretty. I still hear ghost stories, so I'm assuming it's not much better, if better at all.
Wow, that's pretty
But so I'm
wild.
curious what iteration of trade you guys are going to get when it comes to that sort of stuff,
Yeah, that's
because
interesting.
it's and like what level of you mentioned frictional trading. So you think about it from like other ARPGs that have trade. Some of them either have a gold cost to list things or a gold cost transaction to buy things. Some of them have minimum window you can have things listed for. Like I can only post like 10 trades a day, or the trade's up for 10 hours and I got to refresh it. So I'm interested to see like what sort of auction house type system they go with, because there's like a lot of influences from like whether it's Diablo or World of Warcraft or RuneScape's Grand Exchange. There's like so many different examples of existing auction house type things
Well,
that do work.
Last Epoch
But
has an amazing system. I mean, it's they're
they've got
improving
a
it.
bit of an edge because they've got that the faction thing is super beneficial to their game's function, which is I think not something that would work in PoE, but it definitely makes it way nicer to have the faction things.
Yeah, it's really the way they solved for SSF and trade in Last Epoch was absolutely genius. I thought it was a
Yeah.
great addition to the game, and it's going to improve in there. I don't. Have you played Last Epoch at all?
I play a ton. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
played the
love it.
game in the beta ground level.
Right, so did I. I love that
I'm
game.
yeah. So I am a I am. Have you heard about the recent news about the game?
Yeah, I made a video about it, the
Okay.
acquisition. So we're gonna see obviously what that ends up looking like. I'm not too familiar with the company. I know they had some kind of drama with Subnautica and screwing their
Yeah.
developers and all
Yeah.
that
They
stuff.
they run PUBG Mobile and
Okay.
a couple of their mobile games, but that's a similar ill omen as far as I'm concerned that happened with grinding gear games. So a couple of years ago, they sold out to Tencent fully, and all
Right.
the board members have sold their shares in entirety, and it kind of had the same thing. And I don't know if it's just like a trend of ARPGs like cashing out and then just moving on, but hopefully it's like an okay future. But I kind of predict maybe a few years of no boat rocking, and then we're gonna start getting some strange introductions of like maybe like gacha shops or pay to win or whatever type of things, because I just feel like those companies can't help themselves.
Well,
They just
they're beholden to their shareholders. So I mean, like if they
yes, that's
don't
the problem.
if they're not making a return, it's their literal responsibility, their
Yep.
fiduciary duty. I think that's the right
But
word.
we
To
get
duty
shafted.
to yeah yeah
Fiduciary. You're right.
yeah
Yes,
yeah. So that would be their duty to their shareholders to
I
make
get
money.
it.
And
It just
that's
sucks for us.
unfortunately once you hand over the reins like that, you have zero control. So hopefully
Yeah.
they allow them to have some creative control still over the game,
There,
even if
there
it's
was
not.
a response to someone asking a question in the forum post to that. The 11th hour responded that Krafton retains total authority going forward in the trade, although they said they're retaining game design autonomy. But to say
Hmm.
that they have now total authority is a bit of a bit of an ill omen.
Right. Yeah.
It just means they
That's
can
pretty
do
sad.
whatever they want. Hopefully, they don't do anything because that game's great. I honestly say if you were as we're talking about all this Path of Exile stuff and how a lot of it's convoluted and stuff like that. I mean, Ellie is one of the better examples of I would say an ARPG that's doing pretty much everything right, especially off of the Weaver season. It's like so good and so fluid. If I was gonna recommend an ARPG to someone who's never played one, I would honestly recommend Ellie over PoE just because it's so much more digestible,
For sure.
and you could really just kind of do whatever. You could make a homebrew and it's gonna work if you just use a little bit of brain power.
Right.
Versus in PoE, it's so much harder to pull that off.
Yeah, the way that they
There's so many more bells and whistles.
the way that they were able to make everything super digestible in that game is really impressive.
Yeah.
Like just as far as like you could go into it, look at a skill, and you can path on the tree. You just hit Alt on everything, and it'll just
Oh yeah.
explain
Great.
to you what the interaction is. And it's the only
Great
thing that it's missing is like some sort of
content, in
like
my opinion. That's what.
right. Well, I
Yeah.
mean,
That's what.
just as far as the skill tree goes, like hitting Alt, it would be nice to have like this will give you X amount more damage, like in
Yeah.
comparison to what you already have allocated. So that would
For
be
sure.
kind of like a path of building type system inside the game. That's the only thing that's really missing. But you can just do that in your head. I mean, you could be like, okay, this gives me twenty
Yeah.
percent more
The
damage.
tooltip's pretty good there. Also, it's much more reflective than the PoE tooltip, which is kind of nonsensical.
Right.
I mean, the thing is, like is, in my opinion, still the best ARPG ever. I think it has unrivaled amounts of content, depth, complexity, the modular way you could make your character. It's just nothing comes close, which is why, really, like even if grinding your games makes all the worst decisions in my opinion in the past 5 years, and I disagree with all of them, it's still nothing comes close. Like nothing's even really scratching the remote itch that PoE has.
Right.
Ellie is definitely on a really great track, and I think they've made amazing strides in the past couple years. And if they keep on making this level of progression, I think they'll definitely surpass PoE in a couple years. If they because they think they just need a little bit more maybe clarity, like you're saying, and then just content. Like it's just nothing comes close to the path depth of content is the thing, which it does make it quite daunting for new players. But it's just so much to do. There's so much to do. There's just it's hard to beat that.
Yeah, I
Especially if
was
you play 10 hours a day, it's like there's nothing comes close.
Yeah, I was talking about that. I forget who I was talking about it with, but they're not all the builds have even been made in Path of Exile. For, at least from my understanding, like there's just so many different
Normally,
combinations that you could
normally
do.
some asshole somewhere in POE.NINJA's playing some bullshit that's like,
Mm,
he's playing Siphoning Trap. He sunk 10 mirrors in for no reason. But
right,
for the
right.
most part, yeah, I mean, it's true that like there are interactions being discovered. It's quite uncommon to even type in any active skill in POE.NINJA and not see it represented in some way. And without question, sometimes those are worse existing variations of other builds. Like, there's if the best skill is Smite, does that mean every other strike skill is inadequate? I mean, it's worse, but by what margin? If you just really enjoy Reeve, then you're going to play that regardless. If you're losing 10% DPS, I'm still going to Reeve. So it's like
Right, right, right.
people still play whatever their favorite builds are. There's people who play the same builds time every single league, and just basically playing slight variations on it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's such a breadth of, like you mentioned, community, such a breadth of just like different idea sharing and crazy potential for what you can do. And some new interactions are discovered quite often. Like the game is, at face value, I would say Path is pretty solved because of the exchange of information, especially online with things like PoE.NINJA or POB. Like the game's pretty solved as far as interactions goes, but the ways you can apply those interactions are, super relevant, and they become more relevant when you get new uniques and new leagues. Like for
Mm-hmm.
example, there's the new mercenary build. I want to say it's called like Binds of Bloody Vengeance or something, which like makes you get crit. And what that now does is it enables uniques that weren't really used very often previously. So things like normal reckless defense, which gives you increased chance to be crit, and then you want to be crit, and then you want to be then there's a new rune graph for recouping on crit, and there's all this sort of stuff. So you could start to like, or like for example in Mercenary League we have Perkle's Toe, which is a unique that was basically only used on Bama
Mm-hmm.
for your Bamas,
Right.
and it's like the number one amulet for every single merc because it just gives you lucky damage.
Mm-hmm.
So I love to see these kind of things happen where like we get a patch or a league or whatever, and just like it breathes so much life into these existing items, which is why as someone who's like mostly known for unique collection and that series and stuff, I don't even care if uniques are good in a moment and we see like these new items. I just care that they're unique, like they do something new, because oftentimes we get these things that become are unusable items in their current iteration. But then like a 2 months go by and we have a new league and it's now like becomes super relevant. So for example, Badge of the Brotherhood's like a known good item. And there was a stint in time where it was basically unusable. and it was like an alk item, which is comical because it's like quite usable and historically as long as you're power charge stacking or
Right,
frenzy
right,
charge
right.
stacking. So it's like, and there was times where Crown of the Eyes was the most expensive. Crown of Eyes was the most expensive unique in the game, you know, because it worked with Pain Attunement when Pain Attunement the more multiplier used to affect Crown of Eyes. And it's like it went from what was then 40 Exalted, which was the old big currency, to like one alk within a patch. So it's like just to see the like the ebb and flow of these items and these builds, it just becomes so interesting to see like what becomes in favor, what doesn't,
Right, right, right.
what falls in, what falls out. Because you could just, also checking on POE.NINJA, you could see exactly what uniques people are using and which ones are popular, which
Hmm.
ones are probably on the chopping block, which and some would surprise you. So it's
Yeah,
just
that's a
such a fun diversity.
PoE Ninja is such an amazing tool. Just as far as like you can just see what the meta is, just right off the gate. You just click, see which percentage of people are using this, what percentage of people are using this. Just the way that you can filter out that site, it's really really incredible. I wanted to ask you real quick. Just this is the last thing I'll ask you. We've been going for over an hour. So as far as like lucky damage goes,
Yeah,
like what
Azadi's Crest. It's a
can
great
you
shield.
can you explain that just a little bit to people, like how
Sure.
that works?
Yep. So there's a new unique this league that is a mercenary shield called Azadi's. It's a shield that says your lucky damage rolls thrice instead of twice, basically. So the way that lucky works is it basically operates on Dungeons and Dragons rules, which is rolling for advantage or disadvantage.
Okay.
So if you were to roll a number and I'm rolling an offensive number, right? I'm rolling damage. I roll a 1d10. I roll one dice, I get a 6, that's my damage. Rolling it with advantage or rolling it lucky means I roll two dice and I pick the higher value. Unlucky is the opposite. So I roll a 6 and I roll an 8, I pick the 8 instead of the 6 because that's better.
Mm-hmm.
So what the shield does is it says you roll 3 dice instead of 2. So which actually scales really 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 well for certain things. So one of those things being lucky block on the gladiator, which is why the flesh and flame for lucky block on glad is so expensive, like 200 div, because if you're at 75% chance to block and you roll lucky twice, you're at 98% chance to block effectively artificially because it's rolling the numbers so twice frequently. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just like ends up being a crazy amount of efficiency for certain things. So
Right.
another example is the Maven helmet. The Maven helmet says hits against you are unlucky. So if I were to be hit, then it's an 8, and then I rolled a 2, I'd only take 2 damage, not 8. And this now says you roll 3 dice, so it becomes even better. So there's things that similarly for spell suppression, there's a suppression master says suppression's lucky. You only have to get 75, and it's effectively 100. So there's like a lot of cool things with that. So lucky is a funny thing in the game that wasn't really used too often, but with the shield definitely kind of cracked open, I would say, to
Right.
be much more relevant.
Yeah, and then the mercs obviously with Perquel's toe is any lightning build is kind
Sure.
of mandatory to run that. Well, somewhat mandatory. But yeah.
Yep, Perkles plus Doriani's and the whole 9 yards. You can just be doing a quadrillion damage.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm making a
pretty crazy.
storm blast mines elementalist. Not using golems on it, but I'm messing with the mercenary on it. So it's
Yep.
pretty powerful so far. But
You
I'm
mentioned
doing
framework for builds. Any single build that's using lightning damage this league, you just have like 10 times DPS,
right. That's why I did it because
basically.
I'm very
So,
new to making putting together my own builds. So I thought that would be an easy way to start and just get
oh
something that
yeah.
would actually work well. And then I ran a life stacking hex blast build in Frisia with Wrath
Yep.
Pith and Disillusion of Flesh.
Yep.
And that's a really really powerful combination as well for people that don't know the
Yep. Relic of the
dissolution.
Pack typically uses that as a
Right,
build
right.
archetype with you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's I'm using it for mines though, and it was bonkers for Hex Blast, and I basically felt immortal because any damage you take, you just reserve the life, and then if you get
Yep.
down to 0, it just pops off your if you're like running blood magic, it just pops off your auras instead of killing you, which is pretty awesome. So
Yep.
awesome,
Yeah.
man. So
Very
hey,
good.
where can people find you? When are you streaming? You want to let people know where they can see you?
Yeah, I mean, you could just Google me, but that works honestly. But my YouTube or Twitch, it's Lighty. It comes up the first thing, and then yeah, I stream most every weekday,
Okay,
and videos every couple days
cool,
typically. So yeah, but
awesome, man.
if not, You'll find me around. I
Yeah,
do
I'll put
things.
your Twitch and your YouTube links in the description and stuff. I really appreciate you taking the
Sounds
time,
good,
man.
buddy.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you guys for watching another episode. Please like, share, and subscribe if you got anything out of that. And also don't forget to subscribe to Lighty's channel. He's a really, really insightful build maker, and he's got a lot of knowledge about the game, so he is definitely a good resource for you guys to use. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.